The meaning of life is a complicated question. Most people are not asking for what's the dictionary definition of life, because if we are, everyone's just going to be saying cells. Instead, people are asking, what's the purpose of living, right? So, and this is really the only way this question could even be asked, because any other way to ask it is unproductive. And honestly, this question by itself is already quite unproductive anyway, because no one's gonna try to experience pain. Anyway, thus the question is, what's the purpose of living? This way of thinking about the meaning of life does create some problems, however, such as assuming that the natural state is to be dead, right? Or else why would you be asking this question? And that us humans are actively trying to justify our existence. Because if we're not, then the question instead we should be asking is, why not die? Anyway. So, these clauses must be remembered, because all subsequent discussions are just going to be us trying to justify ourselves to keep on living. This is quite a biased perspective, because people are likely to embrace more comforting narratives over the hard and cold ones in order to assuage their consciousness. Disclaimer, I believe that my meaning of life applies to everyone, which means that I think my meaning of life encompasses all of mankind. I'm simultaneously fulfilling the project requirements because it is going to be my personal meaning of life, but I also am going to try to justify why you should believe that this is your meaning of life as well. The meaning of life is a big question, thus we're going to have to put out some categories. So on the x-axis, to visualize it, there's going to be fluidity and permanence. Permanence being you think your meaning of life doesn't really change across your whole entire life, and that fluidity would be it changes all the time. And then top-down on the y-axis would be top-down view and bottom-up view. So top-down view would be saying that this meaning of life is generalizable to a massive group or literally everyone, with bottom-up view saying everyone's special. To demonstrate this theory, I will be using theology as our example perspective. By the way, theology is the belief in a higher power. So, to start, we'll start with bottom-up fluid theological take. This will be that a higher power gives you a meaning of life, but he tailors it to everyone specially, and that he changes it depending on the stage of your life. See? Bottom up, so everyone's special, and fluid, that changes. To continue with the examples, bottom up permanence would be that God would tailor a meaning of life to everyone, but it's something that he just gives it to you at the beginning of your life. For example, one person's goal in life would be to start a big company, the other person's to be a doctor. Moving on to top-down examples, let me just go through this quick. God gives everyone a meaning of life. Everyone gets the same meaning of life, could be happiness for example, and it's permanent, so that's the meaning of life you're supposed to go towards your entire life. Top-down fluidity, God gives everyone a meaning of life, and that is same for everyone across the board. However, because it's fluid, for example, everyone from the age 1 to 5 would have one meaning of life, everyone from the age 9 to 12 would have a different meaning of life. As you can see, it's fluid because it changes based on age, and that it's top-down because for everyone in the age bracket is the same. There are also 3 different approaches to the meaning of life. We just talked about the theological way, which is higher power giving man meaning of life. There's also the biological way, which is saying that your life's meaning is embedded in your body, or like your genes, your DNA, and that could be to reproduce and spread the human genome, for example. There's also the subjective individualist way, which is basically just Frankl, and everyone has their own meaning of life, and that it's created by ourselves. Oh wow, look, I mentioned Frankl. It's almost like I'm trying to slide a quote in here. Quote, man's search for meaning is the primary motivation in his life. It is not a secondary rationalization of instinctual drives. This meaning is unique and specific in that it must be and can be fulfilled by him alone. Only then does it achieve a significance which will satisfy his own will to meaning. Frankl 99. So as you can see, Frankl just completely busted the biological way, and he clearly doesn't believe in theological way either, so he used his own way. Yippee. While I don't really agree with Frankl on a lot of things, but I gotta be real, he's kind of real for this one. Sorry, natalist. You and your Elon Musk hats. If everyone is actually the biological way, South Korea would not have a birth rate of 0.5. My meaning of life. The meaning of life is to take actions upon the shifting responsibilities which are imposed upon ourselves by the unchanging material conditions which shape our lives at the foundational level. You'd be thinking like, oh wow, it says shifting responsibilities. You must be like fluidity, right? And then you'll also be like, well, if everyone have shifting responsibilities, then no one can be really that tailored. So you'd be like, okay, that should be also bottom up. But you also just heard me say earlier that I think bottom up fluidity is kind of stupid. So top down permanence is actually what I'm going for, and I will explain now. As you can see, by saying that shifting responsibilities which are imposed upon ourselves by the unchanging material conditions, and by saying that the material conditions are unchanging, which is we live in a capitalist United States, or at least if you don't move, I guess. But if there's no shifting material conditions, and because I'm a determinist, everything that happens afterwards can be extrapolated from nature versus nurture. So, by talking about the material conditions, everything is currently extrapolated from nurture. So if everyone and everything is extrapolated from nurture, then our responsibilities are born from the way we're interacting with the world. So we're actually just, having responses to what we're exposed to in the world. So you're actually just having responses to responsibilities, and that will be everyone. Everyone's having responses to responsibilities. And that would explain why it's top down, but it's not permanence. Well, it is permanence because that doesn't change throughout your life. When you're young, you're responding to your responsibilities. When you're old, you're still acting upon the responsibilities. Now I will explain why top-down permanence is better, because it holds yourself accountable and makes you not do stupid things and regret it. It gives you more willpower and makes you the person that you wish you are. So, for example, I'm going to use an example from my childhood because I'm obligated to by the project. When I was young, I didn't like studying, but because I had a top-down permanence view, I knew that it was my responsibility to study at this age because that's the environment, what my environment tells me to do, because I am at the studying age, so I study and I set the work. That's how I made myself study. Probably not how you made yourself study, and honestly, probably not how I made myself study, but thinking back,
according to Sigmund Freud's theory, there's the id, there's the superego, and balances them is the ego. Your id would be your natural tendencies, your pursuit of things like pleasure, etc., etc., while your superego is your morality. Thus, it's natural to assume that your meaning of life, which is an ultimate pursuit, to be part of your superego. If you have a superego which constantly fluctuates and bends to your wills and whims, which would be the idea of fluidity in the meaning of life, that will serve little to act as a counterbalance to your id. For if your superego is constantly changing objectives, you will never even be able to focus yourself upon your ideals and balance it well with your id. With that line of reasoning, we can explain why permanence is the better option over the idea of a fluid meaning of life. However, we must still figure out why bottom-up thinking. If you have a bottom-up meaning of life, you would think that you're somehow more special and that your ideas are different from others, and that could make you feel more personally attached to your meaning of life, which could give yourself more justification to keep on at the beginning of this presentation. However, I think that you're special and that your meaning of life is different than other people is also a negative factor because it causes a divide or cleavage between you and other people around you. Whereas having a top-down view on the meaning of life could give you a more sense of community and unity with other people. And as you can see by the way I'm discussing these terms, and collectivism.
Perhaps it's like what Socrates said, that humans try to strive for immortality. But what's true is that death always comes, and that having a meaning of life only delays it. Doesn't matter how good your meaning of life is, death will claim you eventually. Thus, each of us had to be content to live only for the day, alone under the vast indifference. Albert Camus. And now we have gone to the heart of the issue, the idea of bottom-up versus top-down. Bottom-up, the individualist way of thinking about your meaning of life, doesn't extend past your individual. It doesn't extend past just your measly, short, maybe 80 years of living on this planet. Whereas the collectivist, the top-down idea acknowledges that your life means more than just to yourself. Your life means something to your family. Your life means something to your friends. Your life means something to the people, the organisms, the things side of just your body. And thus, which is where my responsibilities, which are my meaning of life, I have responsibilities to myself. I have responsibilities to my family. I have responsibility to my bloodline. I have responsibility to the people I know. I have responsibility to my nation. I have responsibility to my species. I have responsibility to this earth, etc., etc. And as you can see, maybe the first one, about your individual, is your bottom-up way of thinking, yes. But I think that the overwhelming other examples of your responsibilities is more or less more top-down thinking than anything. By now, I think you and I have both realized that this meaning of life isn't really the ultimate top-down view or the ultimate permanence view. It's actually more of a spectrum. There's no absolute permanence or absolute top-down. I wouldn't even say this is really all that permanent, because there's going to be others who are saying that, for example, the meaning of life is to seek knowledge, or something similar to that. And that's a lot more permanent than something which I am proposing, which is depending on your certain stages and your certain affiliations. And it's not really even all that top-down either, because it doesn't apply to people who have no conceptual concept of these ideas. If you can't conceptualize the idea of a bloodline, for example, you can't exactly be held responsible to do anything to it. So people whose mental capacity isn't able to think about these things just won't be applied. So it's...
And I understand that.
My argument isn't perfect. And a good Plato quote would conclude what I think about this. I do not think that the danger I run should make me do anything mean, nor do I now regret the nature of my defense. I would much rather die after this kind of defense. My meaning of life is bad. It is very, very flawed. There's so many holes in the arguments. But I truly believe that it can explain people's actions as best as I can currently think of. I can't really think of anything that can explain people's actions better. However, I also realize another problem with my final meaning of life is it doesn't actually fit any of the three approaches: the theological approach, the biological approach, or the individual approach. Because this meaning of life is overall still a top-down theory, so it's definitely not the individualized approach. However, there could be arguments for that. But it certainly does feel more of the biological approach, certainly, because we mentioned bloodlines, your family, and why would you even feel that way towards your family, or to people who you're related to? Mainly biological.
Americans have never, ever, ever, ever let their country down, because we do not scare.
Because the rubric told me to talk more about my personal life. Thinking back, I do think that there's something in my personal life which kind of puts a dent into my theory. when I was younger, I felt much more towards the US. However, as I grew older in the United States, interestingly enough, I felt more Chinese again. That's rather interesting because that's not something you would expect from any nation. You should feel loyalty towards your nation, like I've said in my meaning of life, but that really does put a dent into the idea of purpose. Fluctuated in my brain. So yeah, meaning of life is responsibilities, but it doesn't actually cover most people because there's people who just are brain dead, and we're thinking about meaning of life, which means we're probably not just talking about people. Most life doesn't really even have a